With the opening week of Overwatch League 4th stage action over, it's time for me to bring you all my first properly updated power rankings now that we've seen every side play at least once in the new 2-2-2 roll-lock system and meta. Just before I get started though, I want to quickly thank you guys for the understanding over the lack of videos in the past week, and I can happily say that things are looking good for me to return to my more regular schedule moving forward. As normal though, let's start at the bottom with my bottom 5, which this week consists of Florida Mayhem at 20, Toronto Defiant at 19, Boston Uprising at 18, Dallas Fuel at 17, and then Washington Justice at 16. Florida only had one game this week, in which they were predictably beaten by the Vancouver Titans 4-0. It showed some promise in this defeat, with the Starman Sire player finally being able to show off his DPS skill and ability, which was key to the Mayhem's best moment in the match when they won one round on Lijiang Tower. However, at no point did the side look very comfortable or truly competitive, with the support line often being picked apart, whilst the tank line found little success either, aside from Gargoyle, who was the only other impressive Florida member alongside Sire player in this entire series. And it was interesting to note that Swan surprisingly played half a set in the place of Fate, though neither really performed that well. I think they are a better side in 2-2-2 than they were in GOAT, but they are still clearly one of the worst in the league at the moment, and we need others to contribute aside from Sire player if they want to pick up any wins before the season ends. Toronto meanwhile had an interesting week, which ended with 2 losses, first to Washington and then to London. In both series, they started off really strongly with competitive displays on the back of great DPS showings from Logix, Ivy and Mangachu, whilst Gods and Neko made major contributions themselves, with Gods in particular having an incredible ultimate eat success rate against Washington, as a Defiant took Assault against Washington and Control against London. But in both series, especially after half time, their performance just seemed to fall off a cliff and become very sloppy and messy, with Yakpung to a certain extent, but in particular Aid, struggling throughout, often being the first to fall in teamfights. Again, like with Florida, there are individual signs of promise and improvement, with the team's DPS pool really enjoying the 2-2-2 meta. But like last stage, it's still not coming together in a successful, coordinated package, which is keeping them from ending the slump they're in. Then there's Boston, who suffered, in my opinion, the worst and ugliest defeat on last week, in their 4-0 loss to the Guangzhou Charge, which initially had me placing them right at the foot of my rankings. Aside from the occasional few kills from their DPS talents of Colorhex and Blase, the team just looked lost, unsure of what compositions they wanted to play, with Fusion's having a torrid time by his own admission, whilst the support line were overwhelmed as well. However, finishing the week against the Hunters, they showed a much more competent display, if still a little rough around the edges, with Colorhex and Blase starting to achieve meaningful success from their impact, whilst the tank and support lines looked a little more comfortable with the heroes they were running, and the strategies they were employing, meaning despite defeat, they took a solid side to 5 maps. This is why I have them off the bottom, but the warning signs are there unless this side continues to familiarise itself in 2-2-2 and really become accustomed to a comp and strategy that suits them. Moving on to Dallas, I think they're a little above the 3 sides below them in terms of overall strength, but it's hard to truly gauge them given they only played one match, which was a 3-1 loss to London. It had started off so well for them as they punished a lacklustre start from the Spitfire to edge out Control, but from then on, the Fuel was simply outclassed. It might be harsh to have them this low, but looking at those above them, I don't see how I could have them any higher, especially with no one really standing out as having a better than average series, with the DPS position definitely underperforming, with AKM having a horrible time for the 2 maps he was subbed in for, and a better all-round performance will be needed in the next couple of weeks if they want to hold on to a top 12 spot. Rounding out the bottom 5 is the Washington Justice, who had a fantastic opening week, picking up a very impressive win over the Toronto Defiant. Even without debuts from their newly signed European tank duo, the Justice came out with purpose for Stage 4, with the side evidently perfectly set up to compete in 2-2-2. Corey and Addo look right at home, backed up by strong displays from their tanks and supports, with special praise to Sansam, who had an outstanding series on Roadhog. It's just one series against Toronto, and I don't want to get too carried away just yet. I'm feeling very encouraged by the play I saw from this side, and if they can repeat that same level of performance, whilst improving, then the sky's the limit for Washington in Stage 4, with the potential easily to break into the top 10 of these rankings in a couple of weeks' time. From 15 upwards, however, is where my rankings get interesting, and really tough to work out, given how little I have to go off, with many sides just playing one game. So hear me out with where I've ranked a couple of these sides, and don't take it too personally if you hate where I've ranked your side. At 15, I've got the Hangzhou Spark. The Atlanta Reign is at 14, the Philadelphia Fusion is at 13, the Chengdu Hunters come in at 12, and lastly, there's the Houston Outlaws at 11. Did anyone else feel that the Spark vs Reign match was the odd one out this week? It was the only series that had the only scheduled match of the week for both sides, making it really difficult to shape up their overall strength compared to others in the league. This is why I put an asterisk next to them and have them at the bottom of this very tight middle order, as I just don't know where to slot them in at. Talking about the series itself, The Spark just looked uneasy throughout, with no clear plan for which compositions and strategies they were comfortable running, with the whole side underwhelming. And when that includes Gouchway as well, the signs aren't positive. Their DPS line especially, as I feared, looked weak with little impact. Unless we see Crystal return to the side and completely rejuvenate it, it looks to be a long and hard stage for the Spark. For the Rainbow, this was a promising performance that built upon the momentum they've been riding from the end of Stage 3. The tank line especially of Pokpo, Dako and FRD was superb in my opinion, whilst every other member stepped up to the plate as well. I'm sure they are a competitive mid-table side, but until I see them against another opponent, just like Hangzhou, I'm not comfortable throwing Atlanta randomly into the mix just yet. However, I am sure that Philly fits nicely where I currently have them. 2 map 5 losses to 2 promising and competitive sides shows that the Fusion aren't a bad side at all, and I think they certainly have more to offer within the 2-2-2 meta and setup, with their DPS duo of Carpe and EQO allowed to shine, but they just can't seem to put in a strong performance for an entire series as they continue to be inconsistent, which I think satisfies their lower mid-table placing until rectified. One of the sides that just edged them out was Chengdu, who I thought looked comfortable within 2-2-2, with Jinmu continuing to show off his quality. But I think their best players from their 2 5-map victories have been Armin and Elsa, who've been excellent at the tank position, with consistent impact and great ult usage, which has really helped the Hunters win a lot of the 50-50 situations they found themselves in. At the end of the day though, they aren't dominating their opponents, like others I'll move on to later. This mid-table placing for their success feels just right for now. Just before we enter the top 10, I've got Houston, who had a really weird week. They played Paris in Stage 4 opener, and looked good after winning the first map, with coordination between Jake and Dante, allowing them to execute a deadly dive strategy that helped them to win the first map. For the rest of the series though, they just struggled in the face of the Eternal Bunker and double sniper setups, with the Outlaws' own mirrors of these compositions not working at all, with Dante seeing no further action, as Cormat once again looked out of his depth. Fast forward a couple of days, they went up against LA, who had just been to New York, and were clear favourites to win here as well. But this time Houston stuck to the DPS partnership of Jake and Dante, while subbing in Spree for Cormat. And with this setup, they won 3 maps, winning the series, and looked much better running more May Reaper and Hanzo Sombra comps. With 2 such different performances, it's kind of hard to judge their overall strength, which is why I've put them pretty much slap bang in the middle of my ranking, with the need to see that their display against LA could be repeated in the next match before I'm comfortable having them any higher. Entering the top 10, the rankings don't get any easier, but for the moment I've set on the Paris Eternal at 10, Seoul Dynasty at 9, LA Valiant at 8, Guangzhou Charge at 7, and New York Excelsior at 6. Paris were one of the pleasant surprises of the week as they went 1-1 with 2 promising performances against good opposition. Soon and Shadowburn have been unleashed and they're living up so far to the potential this deadly DPS partnership can bring, with Soon popping off particularly on Widow, while Shadowburn has been flexing around a lot, with most of his time spent on Mei. The other members of the side have been playing well, with Finzi the clear standout with his Roadhog displays. But with a win over Houston and a narrow loss to the Valiant, I reckon they deserve to be this side of the top 10, although, like with every other time they achieve success, the question now for Paris is can it be sustained? Now I have to talk about Seoul. I've potentially been generous placing them here I reckon, given their 2 losses came against seemingly very strong opposition. What can I say, it's just the same old problems as usual, with older issues from the inaugural season creeping back in as well. We never seem to have a plan for the side, or knowledge as to who the team should play. Unlike a lot of other sides, the Dynasty have absolutely no identity, with its success largely coming on the back of individual showings of skill, often being Fleta popping off, or Jaehong hitting a sleep dart or Bionade. Yet both of these players are being shuffled in and out of the roster, like others. At this point I'm genuinely concerned for the side looking at the fixtures coming up. It's also not impossible that they do a repeat of the last season and miss out on the playoffs altogether, unless the coaching staff can start to kick this team into gear with their match against the Valiant next week. Now a must win in my opinion. And speaking of the Valiant, their only match last week was a narrow 3-2 win with the rejuvenated Parasite, which almost saw them collapse and be reverse swept. This LA side is still strong and promising, but perhaps not as strong as they were in Stage 3, with the impact of Shax and Fact Fiction being a little less, having evened out from their explosive introductions a month ago. I think the issue is trying to figure out which 2 DPS players best play together with one another, from Agilities, Shax and KSF. But once this is sorted out, this side can look to develop and potentially challenge some of the sides above them, but for now, I think an upper mid-table spot suits them nicely. Guangzhou easily had the most impressive first week in Stage 4, with the team continuing to perform to its potential we've been wanting to see for such a long time now. Nira and Happy just look to be a perfect DPS partnership for this meta, with great ability on a vast number of heroes they are utilising, depending upon the situation they find themselves in. Whilst the rest of the team has supported them brilliantly, with particular mention to Hopper, who once again has held the charge together. If they can continue this run, they'll easily find themselves inside the top 5 soon. But I don't want to be too hasty, given they had to have 5 maps to beat Philly, whilst their 4-0 came against one of the weakest sides in the league, so upcoming matches will truly test their level in the overall balance of power. Although their squad depth looks good, with it great to see Fraggy and Bishu take to the stage and find success. Before I start talking about the top 5, there's one team left from this group, which is the New York Excelsior. They only had one match this week against Gladiators, and simply they were poor. I'm not sure quite what it was, but they just didn't look prepared fully heading into their match in the 2-2-2 setup. Early on they were insistent on running dive comps, but didn't come together, and throughout, their Orisa comps weren't brilliantly executed either. There were occasionally some nice plays from Nene, but the DPS lineup was largely outclassed by the opposite numbers. The next few games will tell us more about this side, but purely based upon that performance alone, I couldn't have them in my top 5. But as for my top 5, after the first week of Stage 4, I've got the LA Gladiators at 5, London Spitfire at 4, Shanghai Dragons at 3, San Francisco Shock at 2, and lastly, the Vancouver Titans, who sit at the summit at 1. The Gladiators started off Stage 4 with a bang, taking down the New York Excelsior in the opening match on the back of a fantastic showing from a starting DPS duo of Shawfer and Decay, in which they simply outclassed their opposite numbers on the side of the Excelsior, the rest of the team backing them up brilliantly, including a classic unique strategy of having Hydration play Wrecking Ball, who seemed to work really well against New York. LA couldn't have got off to a better start, and they were now facing a Houston side that just lost to Paris. After a sloppy performance all round, ended up on the losing side in a really disappointing display. I still think I'm going to put a greater emphasis on their New York victory, as I imagine that's a series they prep for more. But it does show, despite the great talent and potential in this side, the Gladiators are prone to taking their foot off the gas as well. London, as predicted, came out of the gates into this meta as strong as we all thought they should be. Jester's Orisa was of his 2018 standard, flanked by strong showings as usual from Fury, and much more consistent support display, with Nuss returning well to the starting lineup. At DPS, the trio of Prophet, Birdring and Guard were subbed in and out, but generally achieved pretty good success. At their peak, they were destroying Dallas and Toronto, and they're bound to be a prominent force in the 2-2-2 meta. But their map losses and control, in both series, still show a weakness to their game, which will need some focus, should they want to be genuine challengers at the top. As I suspected, Shanghai, while still strong, were bound to take a slight hit, with their greatest strength for triple DPS now ripped away from them following the introduction of 2-2-2. That said, the loss against Vancouver was still competitive, and for the most part they dominated their series against Seoul, with the DPS duo of Ding and DM seemingly putting fear into their enemies' eyes. Their tank line also put in a very strong showing here, but it will be against more middle-of-the-pack sides in the coming weeks, but the Dragons will be truly tested to see whether or not they can hang on to the leaders at the top of their game. The Shock, meanwhile, dispelled some of the people's thoughts that they'd struggle in this meta, following an efficient and effective victory over Seoul. We obviously can't gauge too much from it, as it's only one match, but Smurf put in a good showing on Orisa, and Architect as the main DPS option. They still appear to be at the top of their game, and a horrible opponent for any team to face this stage. But clearly, the number one team has to be the Vancouver Titans in my eyes. They 4-0'd Florida, which I'm not exactly going to praise them for, but they pleasantly surprised me with how capable they looked on 2-2-2, with Haxel and Hurag playing amazingly, whilst Bumper was having a solid time on Orisa. An all-round great performance helped them to a revenge victory over the Dragons at the beginning of the week, and this side clearly looks to be the top dogs of the league once more, with the meta seemingly having little impact upon them. And with that, we reach the end of my Stage 4 Week 1 Power Rankings. I'd like to thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with an analytical dive into some of the gameplay that we saw in the last week's Overwatch League action. So if you enjoyed and don't want to miss out, please like, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter for continuing Overwatch League coverage and content. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.